Okay, welcome all to this subject overview Scrutiny Committee 3 meeting. It has been convened as a hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed subsequently. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing it either from the Council Chamber, Civic Offices, Bridgend, or from remote locations. Should I, as Chair, experience any technical difficulties during the meeting, Councillor Colin Davis will step in and take over temporarily as Chair in my absence. In his absence, then Councillor Graham Walter will step in. Please can everyone ensure that mobile phones are switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda, and I will ask the officer to present a brief summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council website. Officers and members are reminded to refer to the page number contained in the public version of the agenda pack. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their microphones on at that point. But I would ask, with the exception of myself as chairperson, at all other times, you keep your microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference. However, I would invite members and officers to leave their cameras on for the duration of the meeting as agreed at the recent full council. Whether attending in the chamber or remotely, if any member or officer wishes to raise a point or question, they should click the raised hand icon on the top right hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and I will come to you in the order I receive requests. If you are in the chamber, please switch on the microphones on your desk and speak directly into the mic to allow those who are remote to hear you clearly. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The instant messaging chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphones until invited to do so. Oops, officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout its duration, and where necessary will mute those not being used. I will ask officers to introduce themselves when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones are switched off when not in use. I will now proceed to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Philip Jenkins.
Any others? Anybody? No? No hands up. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No? Okay, that's easy. Item 3, approval of the minutes. The minutes have been sent out, or they are part of the pack, so could I have a mover for the minutes of the 19th of June 2023, please?
Move.
Second. Okay. Could I have a mover for the minutes of the 25th of July 2023, please? Anybody?
I'll move.
Seconder?
Second.
Thank you. And finally, a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the 22nd of January 2024.
I'll move.
Second.
Okay, thank you. There's nobody wants to comment on them, so we move on to the substantive item on the report, which is the future waste services options. Item 4. I will now ask officers to briefly present the report. Any?
Yes.
Sorry, Chair. Can I come in? Sorry, I missed the opportunity there. I wanted to raise an item on the minutes of the 19th of June 2023. If I can't, let me know. Thanks.
Yeah, well, go on. Yeah, we'll do it now. The way, Colin, please. Yeah. Colin? You're on mute, Colin.
Thanks very much. On page 3, regarding the Shared Prosperity Fund SPF, we talked about it in a bit of depth there, and there was a few issues. I just wondered, I don't expect a complete update now, but I just wondered if Janine or one of the officers could give us a little bit of an update in terms of how are the grants progressing in terms of spend. If that's not possible, Janine, I can understand that, and you can put it off for a future report. But either some sort of update now and/or a written update in terms of where we're at in terms of the spend. Some feedback from the various applicants involved, different panels. Have they got any feedback? Various issues around that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Colin. Am I right in thinking is it the next meeting is the shared prepared? Yeah, very soon. There's a scrutiny on that coming up, Colin, in not too distant future, I believe. Would you be happy to wait till then? Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Got a date on that? On which scrutiny?
It's in the pack, isn't it? On the forward work programme, isn't it? I haven't got it in front of me, but it's.
If it's in the forward work programme, which I missed, that's fine. Thanks,
Yeah.
Paul.
Thanks, Carl. Cheers, mate. Councillor Betts, please.
Yeah, I was just looking for something. I don't believe we do matters arising, Chair. I think it's just ratification of minutes, isn't it? Otherwise, we'd be here till 8 o'clock.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. We've moved on from there anyway. Now, Councillor Gebby, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. SPF is on your agenda for the 19th of June. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Thank you very much. Okay, Janine, it's good. Please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So for the benefit of the recording, I'm Janine Nightingale, the Corporate Director of Community. And I'm joined today, Chair, and Scrutiny by two members of staff from Eunomia who provided the consultancy report that we will be considering on the agenda today. I'm joined with James McMahon and Manon Batil. So they are with us. So what I was proposing to do, Chair, if it's okay with you, was to take you through an introduction myself. I want to address a couple of concerns that not about this report, but that have been made about the waste services. It's not the subject of this committee, but I wanted to give some reassurances. Yeah, okay. I thought that would be appropriate. And then, Chair, I'm going to ask that James and Manon run you through a very short, high-level presentation outlining the pertinent pieces from the report, and then I thought we could take some questions at Scrutiny's time.
Yeah, and we'll ask you the questions. You will ask.
Yes, please, Chair. Just whatever the question is, and then we can have a look at who is best to answer in that vein, if that's okay.
There's no pressure. You don't want, obviously you're not, it's not your to scrutinise you personally. It's, so it can be intimidating. I know. So
indeed. Okay. Oh, they are experts in this field, so they'll be fine. Okay. Scrutinise away. So, so just if I may, then give a quick introduction about today. So this is a pre-decision scrutiny today to look at that Eunomia report that you've had in your packs, and it's to look at the possible options that we have as a council for delivering our waste services post-2026. And we have currently Plan B Management Services Limited, have a 2-year interim waste contract, and so we need to put in place a contract for 2026 after that finishes. Now, the Eunomia report that you have sets out an analysis of the 3 ways in which the future waste services could be delivered within Bridgend. The first is we could bring that service, the waste services, back in-house, and the council could run it itself. Secondly, we could establish a LATCO, which is a local authority trading company, so in essence an arm's length company owned by Bridgend. Or thirdly, we could procure a private waste contract again. So each of these options have been considered by our colleagues in Eunomia in terms of risk on each option and in terms of the costs of those options, and they're all set out in the report in some detail. Now, all of the options that you have in that report include a brand new fleet of waste vehicles procured and paid for by BCBC, and they will be in place from the start of that contract from the 1st of April 2026. So the vehicles that we are using for the interim contract will be retired at 2026, and a brand new fleet of vehicles will be put in place. Now, they will have to be procured in the interim period, but no matter whether we decide to have a reprocurement, LATCO, or bring the service in-house, we will, as the council, fund those vehicles. Now,
can I ask a very quick question there?
Of course.
The 9 million, because everyone's 9 million something, aren't they?
Yes.
Does that include the cost of the?
No.
That's a separate cost.
That's just the cost of running the service, the waste service. The cost of the vehicles, it will be a capital cost, and that will be funded probably by borrowing, and that's outside, and it will be the same. An annualised capital cost. So the borrowing of the money to buy the new vehicles is capitalised in that as an annual cost. Yeah. Okay. So what we're asking today is that we'll run through the presentation and then you can ask all sorts of questions to our colleagues and ourselves. And then after that decision, we will then present your recommendations, Chair, to the Cabinet so they can inform their decisions. But we are trying to get to a Cabinet meeting on the 16th of April to make these decisions. So what I would ask, please, is if you do have recommendations from today, that we do receive those quite quickly so that the Cabinet can consider them and they can go into any Cabinet report for that date. So after that, I'll just tell you a little bit about what happens next. So after that decision is made in April about which option we will go for, will it be in-house? Will we reprocure? Will we establish a LATCO? After that decision, we will then turn our attention to the detail of the waste service itself. Okay? And that includes, for instance, how often we will collect the waste and what materials we will be collecting. You know, will we be recycling the same materials or could we extend it further? And all those decisions, including what type of fleet we will use. Will it be electric? Sometimes we've thought in the past about maybe some hydrogen. All of that will be considered next. And it's our intention to hold a detailed public consultation by the end of the summer this year on any changes to the service, and then bring all of that back to SOC 3, to you, to scrutinise the details of the service. And I think we had talked previously about December, but we might have to do that in September, Chair. So the idea is this is the first stage, and then we will do all the detailed piece, and that will come back to you for a second chance in September for you to look at that. Now, what that will mean, that will allow us 18 months then to mobilise and implement any new waste service regime before that Plan B contract ends in March 2026. That will give us the correct amount of time. So the work streams are twofold. The 2 scrutiny sessions we're holding, the first is today, and there'll be another later on in the year. So this session today is about which option we're choosing, and the later session will be about the detailed methodology going forward. So I hope that makes sense about the time frame and where we're heading with this waste services. So if I may, Chair, I think it's probably worth us touching on very briefly on the Kia contract and the handover to Plan B and the performance of that contract. Because whilst I know it's not part of today's agenda, I do know there has been some concerns raised by residents and members. So if I may, let me just give you a very quick update on that. So the Kia waste contract ends now on the 31st of March this year, and Plan B Waste Services Limited then resume an interim contract from 2 years from the 1st of April, right through the 31st of March 2026. They have a 2-year contract. Now, the movement to an interim contract has been subject to much detailed consideration. We had a Cabinet report in June 22, which set out why an interim waste contract was required. And then in September 23, we had an exempt Cabinet report which set out the results of the tender process and awarded the contract to Plan B Waste Services. Now, actually, back in July 2021, actually there was a SOC 3 session where 21. So before these, so 3 years ago, there actually was a scrutiny session on the future waste services where we discussed all these things, and that's where those 2 Cabinet reports flowed from. Now, the Plan B contract is basically the same terms and conditions as the Kia contract, and it's using the existing fleet, and it's the same collection methodology. However, it does include the provision to trial ultra-low emission vehicles during this 2-year period. That's a bit of a difference. And so the service, ourselves, our officers have been working with Kia and Plan B for the past 3 months on the handover of the contract from one operator to another. Now, this has been fairly complex. It doesn't seem complex on the face of it, but just for me to give you a flavour, Chair, this includes all of the leases on the depots, all the different CRCs, We've had to look at any dilapidations or any relinquishments there. We've looked at purchasing the vehicles. There's 44 vehicles and 5 spares. We've looked at purchasing those and the value of those vehicles. Now, some of them are 6 years old, some of them are less than 6 years old. They have up to a 10-year operational life. We've had a residual valuation on them, and also we've had them checked for condition. We've also looked at all of the kit and machinery that Kia currently use. And if you go into their depot, what they do, they use baling machines to bale up all the recycling. There's lots of sorters. There's an awful lot of skips and movement, hook loaders to move skips around CRCs. But what we are doing is purchasing all of that to use in the interim Plan B contract. But the idea being when we start a contract in 2026, we will have new vehicles and kit then. So one of the other pieces of work that has been quite challenging has been renewing all the contracts with 100 different waste streams. Because if you think about our recycling, you have lots of different plastics and woods and newspaper, et cetera, and all of those have different contracts. So we've had to look at renewing all those contracts for Plan B for those waste streams at the best value. So an awful lot of work has gone on for the contract. So this is now coming to its conclusion, and the handover should take place on the 31st of March, and Plan B should start implementing the waste services contract from the 1st of April. Of course, that's the bank holiday weekend. We have a Good Friday and a bank holiday Monday, but there'll be lots of comms coming out to residents to understand that. But in essence, your collection day will be the same. You'll use the same recycling containers. The vehicles are the same. They'll have a different name on, and most of the staff are the same as well. So it should be a fairly seamless transition. Yeah, so that's what's going on with that contract. Now, if we consider the performance of the Kia contract and some problems we've had recently, let me just give you a little bit of background on this. So in the main, the Kia contract has performed very well over its 7-year life. And this has been outlined in the previous scrutiny reports and the first cabinet report that I mentioned. Now, as BCBC, we've been in the top 3 local authorities in Wales for recycling over the past 4 years. And the last year, we've been second in Wales, and our recycling levels are over 71.38%. So we've done very, very well. The Welsh Government target is at 68%. So Bridgend and its residents should be very proud that we've outperformed the majority of Wales. But during the life of the Kia contract, our rate of recycling has increased by 13.5%. So the rate of recycling was 57.9% back in 2017 at the start of the contract, and as Kia are exiting the contract, the recycling rate we have is 71.38%. So it has improved. Now, with regard to missed collections, and this is something that we've had some difficulty with over the last 10 days, we monitor this across Wales. This is a national indicator. And anything less than 80 missed collections per 100,000 collections is considered exemplar. Excellent. Okay. In Bridgend, the latest figures from January 2024 show our missed collection rate is 50 per 100,000. So very, very, very good. In fact, one of the best in Wales. And it has consistently been at this level throughout the contract. This represents a missed collection of rate in all the collections we do of 0.05%. So 0.5% of all the collections we do are logged as missed. Either we miss a round or we miss a bag, for instance. Sometimes we can go in a round and you know it's happened to us all and your bag is still there and they come back out. In addition to this, I just wanted to let you know that there was a national HGV driver shortage, wasn't there, just after the pandemic, and Kia elected to pay their drivers the real living wage and above and absorb this cost and didn't pass it on to the LA. So all in all, we feel this contract has performed well. Now, there has been an issue over the last 2 weeks, and I want to give you some narrative about why that was. and 10 collection rounds were missed across the borough. Now, we do about 15 rounds a day on average, and we missed 10 across the borough. And I understand this is hugely inconvenient. But however, this was caught up last week. We did 2 extra rounds on top of the normal round each day last week. So we're caught up. That was caught up by the 15th of March. Now, the missed collections were not due to vehicles breaking down, as has commonly been reported, but a backlog of statutory inspections that took the vehicles off the road. Now, if I may, Chair, let me try and explain this to you. So these large HGV vehicles have to be inspected every 6 weeks. It's a statutory inspection every 6 weeks as routine. So what happens, that fleet of 44 vehicles, there's 5 spares, so that at any one time vehicles come off, go out for inspection, and then are returned to the fleet. That's when we use the spares. So what happened was there was an issue with staff capacity at the contractors who are called Dennis Eagle. They're the ones who undertake the vehicle inspections. Now, this unfortunately led to a high number of vehicles that had come off the road for inspections, but which weren't being returned quick enough. The vehicles were there, which meant that Kia couldn't go out and do all of their collections. This resulted in 10 rounds being delayed, but they were rectified and they've been brought in as a result. Now, a lot of these vehicles were brought in 2019 onwards. They're less than 6 years old and they still do have an operational life. In fact, depending on their age, if they're 6 years old, they have up to 4 years of operational life still left. And this is why we're going to continue to use them for the interim waste contract, because we're quite comfortable about that. Now, of course, they will require this 6-week statutory inspection. They have to have that by law. They will come off and they will go and have those inspections. And they will also have to have an enhanced maintenance regime. Anybody would know once your car gets to a certain age, just 6 years, you have to have an MOT and you have to do some work. But we do not feel at this stage there's an operational risk to their continued use. So whilst it's unfortunate that we did have this issue, it is not down to the vehicles not being fit for purpose, and actually it's not really down to Kia themselves. It's unfortunate it was due to the fact that they weren't returned quick enough.
Interrupt you for just a second. I want to bring Councillor Brett so we can itching to ask one. We're not going to have much questions on this, but I do want to ask one little point regarding this. Something that Brett was brought to my attention. Was it Brett? So it's the only question I'm going to bring up on this mind, Richard. Just let you know.
Totally. And I do have a wider question, which I'll bring up in the actual the question in part. But I'd like to thank Janine. She sent us this email this afternoon, and I've spoken with Councillor Nora Clark. I've spoken with Councillor Amanda Williams in relation to what's specifically just been said. I'd like to read a response to a referral that a councillor received when raising missed collections. Thank you for your recent inquiry regarding refuge and recycling collections around the Coity area. As you may already be aware, Kia have been experiencing severe breakdown problems with vehicles over the last few weeks, and this has resulted in This has disrupted and delayed collections around the borough as a whole. Communications have been issued via the comms team in recent weeks. However, the breakdowns with the vehicles is still occurring on a daily basis. So that's what we've been told via referrals, but we've just been told something.
Who did that response come from? Did that come from Kia?
That has come from an officer within the council.
That's the concern, Janine.
No, absolutely. I understand that, Chair, but I'm afraid that and I will say this on record, that is not correct.
Okay, here we are. Well,
that is not correct.
Okay.
These vehicles are not breaking down on a daily occurrence because you wouldn't have a service. These vehicles have been gone out for their statutory inspections, haven't been returned to us. So
I think they described it as breaking down.
I'm afraid they have described it, and I do apologise for that. So, Councillor Bledsoe, if you could forward me that email, and I will take it up with the team. This is a communication error because we've had this conversation with Kia's operational director. I've had meetings with him daily over the last 3 weeks to understand what the issues are here, and I'm afraid that information is incorrect.
Okay, so don't go and labour the point that you've given the answer, Jenny. I'm happy with that. We can't argue. We don't know. you had the response. You're going to deal with that outside this meeting.
I will.
Okay.
I absolutely will. So I'm hoping that some of that does give a little bit of background to why we're here today. So what I am prepared to do, though, Chair, if the scrutiny feel that they would like to have a look at the performance of the Plan B contract, then absolutely we could have a look at that. Maybe 6 or 8 months' time when they've had time to bed in. I'm more than happy for us to look at how that contract is performing, and we can come back later on this year.
Okay. That would be part of the September meeting you mentioned earlier, would it?
The September meeting...
It's more to do with the 2026 onwards.
It is. It's about the collection methodology, so maybe it's better that we pick that up as a separate item, because it will be about the current provision, and I'm quite sure Plan B would like to come and meet you as a scrutiny committee as well. So with regard to that then, Chair, I just thought I'd set out some of that for you, and hopefully it has provided some explanation. I will look into that issue, because it does look like it may have come, some of this misinformation has come from us, which is not helpful. And then what I'm going to do then is to invite my colleagues, James and Manon from Eunomia to introduce themselves, and Eunomia, and then they'll take you through a presentation on the report for the post-26 piece. Thank you, Chair.
Do, please, Over to you.
Perfect. Hopefully that's coming through okay. Fantastic. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for having us here today. Just by way of introduction, my name's James McMahon. I work at Eunomia. I've been the project director on this from our side, and then my colleague Onyx here as well with me. So what we'll do today is, in the session today, what we'll be looking to do, there we are, is go through a number of points about the report that we've sent. As Janine said, it's kept at a very high level because what is being provided in advance, so hopefully this is a nice summary of every part of that. And what we'll do today is go through the context and aims of the project. We'll briefly give an introduction to Eunomia as well, just so you know who we are as a company. We will go over the 3 modelled options. That will give you an overview of the procurement, in-house LATCO. And then we'll move on to the financial side, which Manon will be presenting. And we'll then look at the qualitative risk assessment that we have for the options, which I'll take back and cover. And then we'll look to pull that all together. And then the intention was hopefully to take questions at the end. If we could deal with questions at the end, that would
if that's what you want to do it,
that would be great. Fantastic.
So you never get through it otherwise.
Well, absolutely. So then we thought, just as a brief introduction, in terms of Eunomia, we are an environmental consultancy. We've been around for 20 years, give or take now, and I think everybody at Eunomia is probably a bit geeky, I'll be honest, about the environment and the work that we do. We've got lots of experience from the waste side, there's work that we do as well. The work that we've done for Bridgend is parts of our commissioning options work, which we've done for quite a number of councils, 5 years in particular. It's done over 50 of these projects, so lots of councils like themselves are thinking about the right course for how you operate services. It's the biggest contract a council typically has. It impacts everybody in the borough, so it's vital that when you make the decision, you make the right decision for Bridgend. So it's positive that you're doing this work. And the work that we've done as part of this commissioning options is very much based upon our understanding of the waste service. Helped councils through procurement work. We've helped councils set up local authority companies. So we've drawn on that very heavily for the work we do as part. That's just a brief introduction to the aims and objectives of the session today, project more widely. So as Janine has said, the work that we were commissioned to do was to support the council look at the way in which the waste service could be delivered going forward. And that very much was thinking about after the Plan B contract, which ends in March 2026. So all of our work is very much from the point of, we started looking at 2026 and then onwards. As Janine said, of course, Kier is the current contract, but then it's shifting to Plan B in less than a month's time now. So that'll be starting very soon. And the options that we looked at were re-procuring the waste service, so that would be going out to the markets, and plan B, it could be BIFA, for example, delivering the services in-house, so very similar to how the street cleansing is done at the moment, and then also setting up a local authority company. That's where you have that arm's length company, wholly owned by the council, delivering the services on your behalf. So then, just as a brief overview of the different options, we will send these slides around as well afterwards, just so you can copy. So we just try to pull out the key differences of the three options. So at the top level, that's sort of the governance approach as we see it. And in the re-procurement option, it's very much a case that services are delivered by an external company, so Plan B, as it will be. Under the LAC cooperation, the services are delivered by that company which is wholly owned by the council, but they are a separate legal entity. And then in the in-house option, of course, it's delivered by the council directly, so very akin to how the street cleansing services are delivered at the moment. The next line focuses on staff level, sort of the pension differences that you'll see. So with the re-procurement in the LATCO, staff are employed either by an external company, private sector in the case of the re-procurement, or an external company owned by the council. And key consideration of these two options is wouldn't typically, or you won't see the government pension scheme payments that would be incurred in the in-house option. Staff are employed directly by the council. So we'll come on to that in a little bit, but that's one of the key elements that you'll see in terms of differences. The next line then, the teal line below that, focuses on essentially where the risk sits part of these. So with a re-procurement, excuse me, where you have an external provider delivering the services, risk very much sits with that provider. So Plan B, for example, the risk will sit with them in the new contract. In the in-house and LATCO options, however, ultimately the risk will sit with the council. So even with the LATCO operation, whilst it's a separate legal entity, the council fully owns the business and is financially liable for that service. Even though it's that arm's length removed, ultimately the risk still sits with the council. And then the bottom line, the purple line, just looks at essentially the profit, how that varies between the three. So with the re-procurement option, because it's the private sector, they're looking to make a profit. So you'll typically see a higher profit margin there. With the LATCO, you might see a small profit. The intention there is almost that it's used as a bit of a slush fund, for want of a better phrase, so that if there's an overspend, they have a little bit of money to do that. And then with the in-house option, it's not looking to make a profit, it's looking to deliver the services purely for the residents. So that is a very brief overview of the three options. Hopefully that helps to contextualize the work that we're doing here. And next, then move on to the cost modelling. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Manon.
Hello, everyone. So yes, I'm Manon Bataille. I'm a consultant at Eunomia, and I do a lot of modelling. So I've done the financial modelling for this project, and I'm going to present methodology very briefly of what we did to find out the final results, and then I'll go through the results. So first, very briefly in terms of methodology, what we did is the first step was to gather all the data about the current service. So we worked with Bridge & Council and Kier to get all of the data to build in our model what is the cost of the current service, and we modeled this for 22-23. And then, thanks to this, the last step was to model the cost for the future options, and we looked at these options for 26-27. That's the three steps, and the results we get is an annual cost for each option for 26-27, and then a one-off cost for each option, which represents the transition cost for the mobilization of each service delivery option. So you will see when we go to the result, I'll present you the annual cost and also the one-off costs. In terms of the current service, that's a snapshot of really what's happening at the moment. You have three main services. The main one that you will all think about is the waste and recycling collections, of course. Then you've got the CRC services, and then the transfer station services as well. In terms of staff, it's 120 staff on the contract, so it's quite a big contract. 106 frontline staff, so that's drivers and loaders for the recycling and residual waste collections.
CRC staff, so recycling advisors, so that's mainly the frontline staff, and then you've got also a pool of management staff, supervisor, general management, that make this management group. On the right, you can see the total of 44 vehicles. So within that, you've got 5 vehicles, as Janine was explaining earlier. I won't dwell on that because she's already kind of explained how this is structured. But within the 39 frontline vehicles, you've got the room equips. So that's the recycling vehicle that you will see out with the compartment on the site to collect the recycling. And then you've got a few refuse collection vehicles, which are used to collect the residual waste. And then for each of those vehicles, you've got a smaller version which are used to collect the narrow access properties. That's mainly what those vehicles are. And then finally, the annual expenditure at the bottom, that's interesting to see and to have, the scale of what this contract is in terms of money. So that was 7.2 million spent by Bridgend Council, so paid by Bridgend Council to Care in 22-23 for the annual cost of the services. So that's what's built in the model as the current service. Then we move on to build the costs for each of the future options. So for those, we've got a whole set of assumptions, and here I'm really talking about the main ones. At the top, in red, you can see all the main staff assumptions. The first line is about the number of staff. For the reprocurement, you can see 120, which is exactly the same as in the current contract. There's no reason that this would change. And then for the LATCO and the in-house, you can see this number of staff going up. This is due to the extra management staff that you need to set up. To run a LATCO, run an in-house, you need an extra management structure, which is represented by the increase of number of staff. In terms of the second red line, that is the kind of terms and conditions. The main thing to highlight here, as James touched on earlier, is really the pension. So for the in-house, you're going to have the LGPS, which will apply, which is at 20%. So the employer's contribution for this option will be at 20%, whereas currently, depending on the staff members, it goes from 3 to 5%. And for the reprocurement or the LATCO option, that would carry across, that would be the same. However, for the in-house, the local government pension scheme would have to apply. Every staff that would transfer to the council would be entitled to this pension. That is why this would apply. And that is a big difference in terms of cost. I will show you in a minute. In terms of fleet now, we look at the teal line there. As Janine said, in all of the options, the council provides the capital for a brand new fleet. So this doesn't change for the options. However, in the reprocurement option, the council will get the help from the contractor, so whoever it might be, to actually go and purchase the vehicles on behalf of the council. The contractors, they know the providers of vehicles, and they have high buying powers because of the number of vehicles that they will buy across the country. So because of that, we've assumed that when it's a LATCO in-house, the vehicles would actually be 5% more expensive to the council, because the council wouldn't have the help of the contractor to be able to negotiate the vehicle prices. That's the difference there between the options. Then we move on to the margins. So as James said before, there's difference between the options. In terms of what we've considered, that's the purple line there. The reprocurement, we've considered 12% margin and overhead. So important to say that this is not only the profit, this is not 12% of profit that the contractor would get. It includes their overhead, so that is the support services, payroll support, HR support, that they don't built in as staff within the contract, but as support service that they'll have thanks to their central services. The reason we've put it at 12%, this is what we typically see when council go out to tender and the contractors bid. That's the level of margin that they put in. Here currently is actually running at around an 8% margin. So it's interesting to highlight this difference. So what we usually see is that across a long contract, so 7 years as it is, year by year, we often see the margin that erodes because of the inflation year after year, and often the margin that's targeted at the beginning is not what is in the later years of the contract. It could also be that at the time Care bid for the contract, it was highly strategic for them, and they went a bit more aggressive. So that can explain this 8%, but 12% is really what we see when council go out to tender, so we would really advise to consider this. In terms of LATCO, we've included a 3%, which is a small margin just as a risk pot really for contingency in case of overspend, to be able to have this pot there. and then for the in-house, no margin was included. Finally, to be able to show 26-27 costs, we've applied inflation using all the different indexations depending on which cost we're looking at. Of course, we can't read the future, no one can, so these are estimations in terms of inflation. The actual inflation may be slightly different, and which means that the total costs that are presented for 26-27 might be slightly different, but the comparison between each option, though, will be accurate, and that's the main goal of this exercise. So that's it for the assumptions. I'm now moving on to the results, and the first part is the total annual costs. So we're not looking at the mobilization one-off cost here, it's only the annual costs. As touched on earlier, the capital cost for the vehicles is integrated in there, but as an annualized capital cost over 8 years it is done, yes. So you can see here at the bottom, the bold figures are the total annual cost for each option. The baseline here is the current service. We find back the 7.2 million that I presented earlier, and then all of the other options are between 9 million and 9.37 billion. So you can see that they're above the baseline because of the inflation that's been applied. So what we can see is actually the reprocurement and the LATCO option appear very similar in terms of financials for the annual cost. The LATCO is less expensive, but it's very marginal considering the total that we are looking at. And then the in-house looks more expensive, and the main reason for that really is the local government pension scheme. As you can see on the line of the frontline staff, yes, here, you can see that reprocurement and LATCO, they are at 4.04 million for the frontline staff, and then in-house goes up to 4.72 million. So that's a big increase here that is then compensated by the fact that there's no margin, but in total it still brings an increase. That's really due to that. So that's really the main difference and why this in-house option looks more expensive. One thing I wanted to highlight, sorry, as well, is those total costs. So when you look at reprocurement, 9.03 million, it doesn't mean that if Bridgend decides, okay, we're going to reprocure in 2026, it doesn't mean that the bids are going to come back to you exactly at this sum of money. This is modelled on the current service, and as Janine said earlier, it might be that Bridgend decides to change the way the services are done, change the methodology of collection, so I don't know, change the frequency, have electric vehicles, in which case the price of the service would actually change. So yes, so in that case, it means that if the services change, so if you change the frequency of collection, or if you include electric vehicles in the contract, the price of the contract will change, and that doesn't represent this. However, what is accurate, once again, is the comparison of each option. So reprocurement, in-house, LATCO. If the service were to change, they would go up or down together. So we can really look at those as the differences between them rather than the total cost. Then we move on to the one-off costs, which are the mobilization costs. And we can see that the reprocurement option has the less expensive one-off cost, and the LATCO is the most expensive, up to 1 million, whereas reprocurement is at about 500,000. So in terms of main costs, main items within those costs, for reprocurement, it is really this legal and technical support to reprocure the service. So you will have to go out to tender, probably do a dialogue process or negotiation process, whichever the council chooses, but that is a long process and requires a lot of support, which makes up for this cost here. Then when we move on to in-house and LATCO, both of them have a big cost, which is implementation of a waste IT management system, which at the moment is provided by the contractor. They already have one. It costs them a lot less to implement it because they have it on other contracts than what it would cost to the council to actually procure their own, implement it, integrate it within the systems that the council already has. So that's really a big cost for both options. For both options as well, we have legal and HR support for the onboarding of the workforce within the council or within the LabCo. And then when we move on to the LabCo, the reason this is even more expensive than in-house is because you need legal and technical support as well to set up a new entity, which the LabCo is. You will have to set up a whole new entity, build a business case, and all of this, of course, costs money. So that's what sits behind those costs. One thing to highlight here is that, yes, in-house and LabCo costs in terms of mobilization look very expensive, but if Bridgen decides for one of those options and sticks with it for a long time, they will only happen once. Whereas reprocurement, you have to do it every 6 to 8 years. Every time you go back out to tender, you would have this cost recurring. I think that is it for the costs. Sorry if I've been a bit quick. I will take questions at the end and be more than happy to answer. But I'll hand over to James.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. So now that we've gone through the financial costs, the other elements that's part of this project was the qualitative risk assessment. And as you can see on the slide there, this very much focused on assessing each of the 3 different options, so the reprocurement, the in-house and the LabCo, against their 7 different criteria. So each of those criteria, well, that's based upon our experience of the waste industry setting up these entities. These are the key points where we see risk being incurred as part of introducing delivery option. So things like financial and commercial risk, what happens house option versus a local authority company, market conditions. So if you went to the market to you have enough time, would the market be interested? Or an ability to change, looking at ability to influence services in. So when we were thinking about the 3 different options, we have the criteria that's being assessed. And the approach we take here is very similar to our procurement work. So we aim to treat it almost as if it's a procurement exercise, and you can see that each of the 7 different options or criteria have a weighting that's been, and the weighting reflects Bridgen's focus in terms of where these risk areas are most important to council. When we've been assessing each of the different options, essentially they're scored out to range between 1 and 5. That is then applied by the weighting to give you the overall. So that's the approach we take. It is very much aimed to be treated like a proper procurement exercise in that sense, so that it's robust and you can see the model behind it. And when we give it a score of, say, a 4, there's a specific criteria that's tied to a 4, 5, or a 3, for example. Yes, sorry, that's a very good point. Thank you, Janine. So the key point to take here, when we look at the score, achieving, say, a score of a 5 is beneficial in that sense. So when you look at the score bottom there, the reprocurement receives a score of 66. That is better. So in this evaluation, having a higher score, 100, is more beneficial from a risk perspective to the council versus a lower score. As you can see, the LabCo, for example, receives the lowest at 56. So that's, yeah. And just to point out that a higher score is beneficial for the council. And I think the key thing I wanted to focus on here is the scores that we gave them after evaluation. So when we did the qualitative evaluation, reprocurement came out as the most beneficial from a risk perspective. Next, it then felt that the in-house was the most preferable after that, and then the LabCo. You can see that between the in-house and the LabCo, the difference is very, very limited. It's only percentage points difference, whereas the jump from, say, reprocurement to in-house is slightly greater there. I won't dwell too much on the bits behind. I think some of the bits to probably pull out as part of this assessment. I'll pick on a couple of the criteria, I would say. So if we look at the financial and commercial risk, you can see that the reprocurement option had the highest score. That got 16% out of 20. The reason for that is because that score represents essentially the same risk position as you currently have. So because the services are outsourced at the moment, currently to care, soon to be Plan B, if you were to reprocure, you would likely get a similar risk position as you have. With the in-house option, you now receive the lowest score. That represents the fact that under this option, all of the financial and commercial risk sits with the council. So because the service is delivered directly by Bridgend, everything financial, the council. The other key elements to pick out in this include the IT costs that Manon's already mentioned. There's also the material sales as part of the contract, so the council will then be responsible for that. And material sales, the market fluctuate drastically, quite a large risk. And then the other key element of this option is liability. So under the in-house option, staff would be liable for the LGPS, which, as Manon has already explained, does add quite a lot of contracts. With the LATCO, it received a slightly better score. It still suffers from some of the same risks as the in-house, in the council is still ultimately financially responsible for the service, even though it's delivered by an outsourced company. But the key difference here between this and the in-house is that there's no LGPS liability that's it.
Of course. On that, in-house is second, isn't it?
Yes.
So the higher is better. Last one on that is the third one is that the video?
Oh, sorry, if I did, I guess I meant so the
I thought you did.
yeah, so the in-house is the second best
Yeah.
option, and then the LATCO is the third assessment. Yes.
They both got LPGS liability is the last one, right?
Just the in-house. So under the
in-house.
Under the LATCO, there's no LGPS liability, which is one of the benefits if the council were to consider. You can have slightly more control, council-owned company, but you don't have to pay the LGPS.
Pay the LGPS if you want to. That.
So
cool.
Feasibly you could, if you chose to, yes.
Or that score then would replicate it.
Yes, it would then match, absolutely. So the other key things I thought just to mention are on the market conditions. You can see the in-house and the LATCO received top scores. Because you don't have to actively engage with the waste markets, it wasn't seen as a risk. With the reprocurements, and this is one of the key points I think does need to be made, the timeline reprocure is actually quite tight. So it seems a bit bonkers to say this, but if you're looking at March 2020, it seems like a long time away. But when you take into account the mobilisation window that you need to get vehicles in time, you need a robust procurement procedure, which typically can take about a year. By the time you've then developed the document you're against, start to see how that time is eroded quite quickly. So when we mapped a reprocurement timeline, it didn't give the council very long to mobilise, essentially. And when we talked to the market operators, we actively talked to them, that was one of the things that they picked up as a real concern. Can manage that, because you could extend with Plan B if you wanted to. You could look to roll over the vehicles into the new contracts, so they essentially buy you time a new fleet in. So you can mitigate it, but as it currently stands, it is best. And the other key bit, I think, just to pull out here is the control and ability to change. So this is thinking about how the council influences services. So I'll start from the lowest and then work to the highest. With a reprocurement, because you have a contract to manage the services, if you want to change anything, you have to negotiate with Plan B or BIF, whoever services. So you can't very easily change scope. You can, of course, do it, but it has to be contractually agreed, signed off, there's the cost incurred. With a LATCO, you have a similar, problem is the wrong, have a similar process in that you'll have a contract with the company to deliver the services. If you want to change those services, you'll need to negotiate and agree change to the contract. but because the council owns the company, it would be easier than dealing with an external waste operator. With the in-house option, because the council will deliver the services, you have the most freedom to direct how you want to deliver them. The only caveat is that even though it's an in-house operation, you can't, for example, dictate where a refuse truck will go on any given day, because they operate on a set schedule, which of course is residents to make sure they know when to put the bins out. So whilst you can influence the service, it doesn't mean that you can chop and change everything, week in, week out, for example. That's just something I'm bearing in mind. But the key takeaway here is that from a qualitative perspective, re-procurement first, then it's the in-house, and it's the local authority. So what we wanted to do then essentially was just to summarise what we have. So the table that we have up on the screen brings together the total annual costs Manon has talked through, then got the mobilisation costs, which are one-off costs that would be incurred to introduce that new approach, and then you've got the qualitative risk assessment. So you can see this brings everything together essentially. From the cost perspective, the LATCO is the cheapest option from an annual cost, but then it has the highest mobilisation cost, so it's slightly offset. Again, as Manon said earlier, both with the in-house and the LATCO, that mobilisation cost should feasibly and hopefully be a one-off, whereas with the re-procurements, which the annual cost, whilst it's very close to the local authority company, mobilisation cost is cheaper, but that is incurred every, say, 8 years. That will keep coming around. Then on the flip side, from the qualitative perspective, the re-procurement most beneficial, and it was the in-house of LATCO. So then, on just the final slide, we had essentially just a repeat of that, but from Eunomia's perspective, when we looked at the risk, different options, the re-procurements was favourable, with the caveats that the timeline is a real risk. So if the council were to choose to look at re-procurement, that would need to be very carefully considered, and you would have to look at how to mitigate that risk. From the financial perspective, the LATCO was the cheapest option. Granted, it did have the high mobilisation cost, but that should be a one-off. When we take all of those options together, Eunomia's perspective, we would recommend that the council looked at the re-procurement option or the LATCO going forwards. But very much are aware that this is down to the council's affordability considerations and also political drive where the council would like to go, direction of travel essentially. But from our perspective, that was our conclusion coming out of this. So hopefully that's been a useful summary of the findings. We were thinking now might be a good chance to go through any questions that have come up.
Well, thank you very much for that informative presentation. I'll invite Janine. Do you want to come back in quickly? Did I see you indicate anything quickly then? The hands come up?
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think hopefully that has given a flavour. The report is incredibly detailed, but we wanted Scrutiny to have all of the information.
Yeah.
So that was a snapshot really of the high level piece that we've gone through. Again, as James and Manon have explained, this is a model they've put together based on their experiences. It's their opinion. Of course, it's a decision for us as a council, which way we want to go forward. So more than happy to take comments, Chair, on this, and then of course we would take Scrutiny recommendations back. So,
okay, thank you, Jane. Councillor Martin Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. There are three main options, or three only options put in us today: the in-house, the LATCO, and the outsource. There's a big spectrum of options out there. But can I ask why it's only those three options that are considered? And I've been slightly wrong-footed when I started looking at the and then through the presentation, because my assumption, perhaps wrongly, was that retender was the retender on the tier model, but a fully outsourced, them providing the vehicles and everything else. Reading between the lines, it now looks like the retender is based on the Plan B model. So there are two, insofar as taking ahead, but insofar as we are providing the vehicles. With the Kia model, we don't provide the vehicles. Plan B model, we do. But yet there's two sub options, if you like, that we've only papers. So what I'd like to understand is why we've arrived at those three, and was that as at direction of office or suggestion, and that's what you arrived at. That's my first question, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Williams. And it is actually an interesting question, because this is a fairly chunky and complicated piece of work. So I do understand how it could be a bit confusing. So let me just explain. This is the first stage of us looking forward. When you're going to decide which option to pursue, and for us, this is what we had asked Eunomia to look at, these three options: in-house, a re-procurement, or a LATCO. Now, I think there could be many forms of an arm's length company, absolutely, but the one that we have been advised is a LATCO would be the best one for us as a company. Now, in all those three options, once we agree which option we want to do, the next thing is looking at the methodology. It isn't using the existing collection methodology, and it isn't, we need to look at how often we will collect, what materials we will collect, and what vehicles we will use. And the reason I'm saying that is because Welsh Government are going to announce new recycling targets. Lots of authorities in Wales, 12 local authorities now, collect 4 weekly. We haven't made any of those decisions here in Bridgend. We need to look at what the recycling targets are, and then we need to, from Welsh Government, and then we need to look at what volume of waste we'll have, and then look at how often we need to collect for that. So it's we have to go backwards in order to calculate that. So none of those decisions have been made about what methodology, what vehicles we will use. They will be new vehicles, or what collection frequency, or what materials we will recycle. That is it, the second option. What we have done today with Eunomia is looked at it from a cost perspective, baseline on the current contract, and looked at it from a risk perspective. That doesn't mean we're going to deliver the Kia contract or the Plan B contract. We won't. It'll be a different collection methodology and a different way forward post-2026. But that is what we'll come and discuss with you in the autumn. Come and discuss that, because we'll do all that work once we know which option, and then we'll come and have those conversations with you. And actually, do you know what? Those are probably a more detailed conversation that we need to have, because for most residents, frequency of collection is one of their main questions, I think.
I think you answered Martin's question regarding the ownership of the vehicles, because we buy in the vehicles back currently from Kia, but yet this new contract going forward, we buy in them in the first place, so there is a difference there. I think that's what Martin's trying to say. Martin, is that your point?
Kind of, Chair, but also within the outsource, so forget the in-house and LATCO. Within the outsource, there are a whole range of options that could have been put. I don't know from reading this paper whether we're talking about a fixed fee for a number of collections a year. I don't know whether we're talking about a tonnage basis. I don't know whether we're talking about a fully reimbursable model. I don't know whether we're talking about a pain gain mechanism. So until you understand what those options are, those options, depending on what contractual basis forward on, would have a significant difference to your cost comparison and risk rating at the end. So unless there's some indication of why we've arrived at what we've arrived at and what contractual basis predicated on, I'm struggling to see how we can choose between the outsource, which could be reimbursable, could be fixed cost, which could be tonnage based, versus an in-house. And then once we've set sail on this, given the tight time scales, will we have time to roll back on it? I don't understand why we've got to these three and what is underpinning, particularly the outsource model.
Would the experts to answer that, Janine?
Yes, please. James is going to come in and answer that.
James, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. So
you call them experts, by the way, Janine, right? Not me. Okay. Go on, James.
Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, you're right. With the contracted out option, there are lots of different ways to that contract. That is very much something that you would decide when you've got to essentially the procurement option. So, as you say, fixed fee versus a variable. That is all something that you would determine in the documentation that you would develop and then go out to the market with. So the costs that we have been built up, first principle, and the sundries that sit behind it, the very detailed elements of how that's then structured would have to be determined at that later stage. The other element, just to touch on, I think, was vehicles. So you're absolutely right. In this option, we've assumed that the best way of putting it, but the council acts as the and contracts would then purchase vehicles. The reason we've done that is when we've done procurements in the past, council funding the vehicles comes out cheap.
James, I know you want to answer the member.
Oh, sorry,
yeah, I'm not sure if you're at home, you'll have to
sorry.
speak. It's unfortunate, but you'll have to look to the front and speak into the microphone.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It may not pick you up, you know.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have told you that.
No, not at all.
I know it's nice to speak to the member directly, but don't worry about that.
Forward. Absolutely.
Sorry, Martin.
So, from the vehicle perspective, the reason that we've gone for the council funding them on behalf of the contractor is because when we've done procurements and we've engaged with the market, that is the cheapest way of vehicles being purchased. What you would typically see if you want to re-procure, the council has better borrowing rates than any contractor would be able to achieve. So when they choose for Plan B to fund vehicles, the interest that they would be charged on the capital payments would be a lot higher than the council would charged. So as a result, the council is then paying more their higher interest rates. You then also get a bit of doubling because the cost of capital will be captured in their financial model procurement, and then they will apply more overhead to that cost as well. So by the council funding vehicle, you help to cut out their margin and overhead, and generally the interest rates achieved by a council will be. So that's why we've gone for it. Ultimately, it should return at better rates for the council.
Thank you. Janine, just one clarification. 4 weekly, 2, 3 weekly, whatever it may or may not be, only affects residual waste. They still collect recycling weekly. Is that correct?
Well, at this stage, yes, I think is the short answer. But at this stage, we haven't made any decisions on that. That's what we need to do next, and that's what we'll be coming back to you to talk about. We'll do a public consultation later on this summer when we've worked out what we need to do. We'll ask the public what they think about this, and then we'll come back to you. And I don't think we will be changing, personally at this stage, the recycling. No. That will probably still be a weekly collection, but I think we may have to look at what we're going to do with residual. But those decisions haven't been made, Chair, and they're the next step, and we're happy to come back and have that discussion with you when we've got all of the detailed information.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Jonathan Pratt, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Very useful. From my view, it just seems to be whether it's a choice of whether we join the local government pension scheme or not. If we go to procurement, we obviously don't have to, not our problem, private contractor, and they all have their own pension schemes. If we bring it in house, we'd be obliged to. The LATCO, there would be a choice. I would understand on whether we do a standard pension or we let the new members of staff join the local government pension scheme. On that basis, looking at the LATCO model, would we be able to join procurement processes as our own entity to other local authorities? Say, Neath Talbot they've had enough of running their own service, they want to outsource. Could the arm's length company, whichever we call it, from BCB, go, well, okay, we'll do it for you. So we'd have a larger profit model, potentially. Could we do that? Or otherwise, I don't really understand the point of producing a LATCO. It is a point, an A or B option, either run it out in-house or outsource it. So the question is there, could we procure to other local authorities and run it from an arm's length company? Thank you.
Does it touch on this in the report? Doing that sort of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a local authority company, there's an element of commercialism. There's an 80-20 rule. 80% of your work has to be delivered for the local area, the council essentially, and 20% be for commercial interests. If you were to look to use that 20% sort of carve out under legislation, I don't think you would be able to, because the size of the contract would be large essentially, because it's another local authority contract. However, you can have a local authority with multiple, you can have a LATCO with multiple local authority owners, essentially.
It has to be set up from the beginning that way.
Can join later. So Cubico is one of the well-known ones in the waste industry, and that's it's got Cheltenham and other councils in that area. I think there were about 7 local authorities who are not owners of the. It was started, I think, with a handful of authorities, and over time it's grown. So it's feasible that you start as a LATCO and then bring in other councils over time. That starts to get very legal. I'm not going to stray too much into that realm, but it is feasible.
I think that's. I make a comment, only a quick comment before I bring Councillor Evans in here. What you just said about Cheltenham and others up there now, obviously, let's say Cheltenham had the LATCO, and other councils have seen this. Thought, that's a good idea, we'll join that. That doesn't seem to have happened with procurement. We've procured out now for 8 years or so. No other local authority around here has followed our lead. It's just I find, it's such a great idea to re-procure. Why aren't other authorities doing it? There's one other apparently up in North Wales somewhere. So I do find that odd, so it's a comment, and the LATCO, as you said, in Cheltenham was attractive to the other authorities, and they said, yeah, we'll have a bit of that, and they joined. But that hasn't happened down here, No other council has been procured.
Yeah, I think it's ready, but it's a very political decision. The Bridgend, you've procured however many times now. It's obviously worked for you. There might be some gripes, but broadly it's working quite well. For the other councils, if they've already gone in-house, the decision then to move back out could perhaps be more difficult, because you can of course make the move from, say, if Bridgend went from the outsource model house, then go back out again. When you do that, you would be carrying the local government pension liability back with you, because under TUPE regulations, staff have to terms of protection. Once you make the jump from, say, outsourced in-house operation, benefits of then going back out might be slightly eroded, of course, over time, different teams. And that could be part of the reason why others haven't joined Bridgend. But largely, yes, it is a very political decision.
I just want to make that point as well. Councillor Melanie Evans, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question will be on the qualitative assessment in page 71. And after listening to the presentation and reading this assessment, reviewing the in-house option, the assessment identifies the market conditions as favourable. There is an opportunity to control, shape and develop the service. There is a low probability of high risk in both operational and implementation. There is no difference in the quality of service. However, there is a high financial risk based on pension costs and more extensive recruitment required, but taking recruitment into consideration could be interpreted as a positive, as it's increasing the job market. Now, on reflection, there is a realization that we can only control the controllables. We cannot control the financial market, price of materials, goods, etc. Sometimes choosing the cheapest option is not always the best option to produce the best outcome. Therefore, the three options that we have been provided with propose a risk. Now, I suppose there is a question that I would like to ask, and I'm hoping that you can help me understand. What is this authority's appetite to risk, please?
Are you asking that, Evans?
Yeah.
That's to an officer, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you can't answer that, can they? Obviously.
No, that's fine. Yeah, Janine perhaps would like to take that one. I just need to understand, what is this authority's appetite for risk, please?
Councillor Spandrick, I think he's indicated he wants to come in. John, please.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Okay, well, I can answer on behalf of the authority. I can give you my opinion. I think we are a risk-averse authority, and we need to look at risks. And the page 1, I think it was, that
that's what was mentioned, yeah.
referred to. I talked about financial and commercial risk. And personally, I think maybe those scores could be challenged. 4% for the in-house and 8% for the LATCO. It'll, because it was touched on earlier, that the LATCO really, this council still will be under 100% response with scores challenged then.
But that's something given, we could ask.
Because it gets back to the risk again.
You?
And also, there's a 16% score given for procurement. A good score in a way. There's a great financial risk there. If Welsh Government change targets mid-contract, then we'll be hit with a financial cost to change the contract. There's quite a high financial and commercial risk there, but it's not reflected in the score.
Isn't there an incremental rise in these contracting rates over time?
Well, that's what we can find out from Welsh Government. Yeah.
Do we know what they are? I'm just going to phone you said earlier, Janine. Just to get to that point, but I was under the impression that every so many years they go up by 5 or 6 or 7%. And no? You just make it up as they go along.
It is currently at 68%, Chair, and we're at 72%. And Welsh Government are due to revise that, but we haven't, for a couple of years, had any revision to that, and we're waiting for that. Okay. But what I would say today, and to be fair to my colleagues from Eunomia, what they have done is played this with a completely straight bat. They have built a model, and they've looked at risk. What they've done today is outline risks for us of either of the or any of the options. So what it is for us is not for them to answer that question, and not for me as the director, really. It's looking at that, and for you politically to make the decision, an informed decision as to which option you think is best. Now, of course, you need to do that, taking all of this into account, knowing that some options are more expensive than others, and knowing that there is more risk, and there is more risk, some options than others, and that's set out in that qualitative score. But at the end of the day, Chair and SOC and Cabinet, these are decisions for you. Eunomia have just given their professional opinion, which one they think is best for us. But for us, this is a decision for yourselves.
Yeah, nobody's criticising.
Oh no, I understand that, Chair.
No, and we appreciate that job. Councillor Evans certainly wasn't doing that. I put words to her mouth. She definitely wasn't doing that.
Oh no, I totally understand that. But I suppose for just to, I know Councillor Evans would never do that. But I just wanted to say, really, what it is there's no answer. What is the risk appetite of the council? We have, as the director, I've commissioned this work. I've outlined the risks of all those options to you, and as a scrutiny committee, it is now for you to decide. Have a look.
Question, isn't it?
Absolutely. Have a look at which one you think would work for us.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank you both for the report. It's very evident that you both have a lot of experience and knowledge around this topic, and that's very evident. The one thing I picked up on, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, and I apologise, Chair, because we try and strategise our questions before and then we get the presentation and everything just completely goes out of the window because you say things that lead to other questions. That's a good thing. So my question is based around, it's 3.7 in the reports rather than your presentation, which is on page 21, but it was brought up in your reports. The assumed or the proposed 12% profit for any contractor that would take the contract on. I don't have any expertise in this industry. That seems high to me on such a high value contract. And there was a point of clarity, because when you were talking, you said that the 12% included some of their overheads. The presentation says 12% plus overheads. So I just wanted some clarification on plus or included, because to me, if somebody's talking about a £7 million contract a year and they're looking to make 12% on that, that's a lot of public money going to a private company to provide a service that a lot of local authorities around the country provide. And we do come down to political choices on this, and it's been stated that perhaps we may prefer to pay a private company 12% profit margin than bringing it in-house and maybe having to pay staff a few more benefits that they would be entitled to. So this is about political choice. We have in the last meeting agreed a pay award to people who work in this authority, and we recognise fair and equal pay, and rightly so. But we're on about now making choices based on people's working conditions that other local authorities in Wales haven't followed, as you pointed out, Chair. And I'm personally not very comfortable with deciding on 12% of a £7 million a year contract being profit to a private company.
I thought you had some sort of answer to that in the earlier presentation, but go on, Maran.
Yeah, no problem. I want, yes, to confirm that it might be the wording in the report then, but it's the 12% includes margin and the overheads. So I think maybe we said 12% margin and overheads, but it's all included. So it's not only profit, it includes the overheads, it includes the support services, and generally it would be half and half. So maybe you're looking at an actual profit of 6% and the overheads sitting at 6%. It's not exact science, but that's the kind of level that we see.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ian Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going down the same line as Councillor Bledsoe. It just doesn't seem to ring right with me. Why has a LATCO been dismissed, really, from any reckoning? Is it because of the pension contribution, sickness pay and other benefits? Because as a living wage employer, should we be considering an option that curtails fair and equitable benefits to a prospective workforce? Should that be on the table?
Well, we've got the option to pick from these three options, I suppose, and if we pick that in-house option, that's what we're doing. But it's a matter for us. That's a political decision, isn't it, I suppose? Again. What was the question again? Yeah, sorry, did I miss the question then?
No. If as a living wage employer, should we even be considering an option that curtails fair and equitable benefits to a prospective workforce?
And would you direct that to, Ian?
I'd like to direct that to either Janine or one of the cabinet members.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask. That's not a question for that's a political question, isn't it? For anybody, John, what do you want to answer that? Or?
Thank you, Chair. More than happy to answer it. And I accept the question raised. Should we be looking at that? And there is a serious question. You have to decide as a council, politically. So do we want to employ staff?
It's almost a moral sort of question, isn't it?
Absolutely. Which is every single resident in the county borough, as the report says. And do you want to treat them the same as staff working in the offices? So yes, we should. Still a decision we need to make. We haven't made that decision. That's the reason why we're here today. So look at the options. Yeah. Accepting the fact that some of the options are less favourable for staff who would provide that important service.
I'm going to bring Councillor Bledsoe, I think it was Councillor Williams back in here, because Councillor Williams made a comment in pre-meeting on this very point. Do you want to make that point, Martin, or would you rather one of,
Try and remember, I think that other people have touched on it, though.
Well, no, you made a specific point about if it's about terms and conditions of people working in the council, why don't we conduct every single service out? That comment.
I mean, Chair, I try and steer away from
questions
of morality when it comes to this sort of thing. But let's talk about questions of consistency. So I think the moral point has been made. But and it is actually related to the question I was going to ask, so I hopefully I can flow on.
Well, I don't want to bring it too early because other people waiting.
No, but it's
you are
about,
next actually anyway.
No, but
so,
it's, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but it's about consistency. So if it's right to form a LATCO or to outsource, if it's the right thing to do, then it's the right thing to do to consider outsourcing everything.
Yeah.
Or it's the right thing to do to insource. It seems we're building an inconsistency in here if we're not careful. And you know, as I said, other people have talked about the morality of that, and I'll perhaps leave that for another discussion in another place. But it doesn't seem to be a consistent way of working if we're going to consider one without the other. Which brings me on to my question, if that's okay.
Well, yeah, we made a point I wanted to make anyway.
I talked earlier about the other options, and I said that there were a myriad of options in the outsource world, and I don't feel that this is a robust comparison until we know the assumptions of the outsource model proposed. But equally, talked a lot in the budget run-up and in the scrutiny of the draft budget about future ways of working and I'm really struggling. Sorry, future ways of working and future operating models. And I wonder if the in-house option has been explored broadly enough. And it's not for the consultant's report; they've only been able to report what they were commissioned to do. But have we looked more broadly about if we bring things in-house, how we can leverage efficiencies through new information systems, better scheduling of routes, multi-skilled workforce, 24/7 operations. Therefore, you don't need a plant. You know, have we looked at that? And is that a trick we've missed here? Is that something perhaps we need to consider for the next phase?
You reckon that too?
The director, I think.
Director. Yeah, Janine, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Williams. Yeah, absolutely. We need to consider all options when we look at a service. If the decision was to bring it in-house, we will need to look at that and efficiencies. But what I would say is the current model is pretty as efficient as it gets in terms of the collection and the piece, because that is bread and butter for waste operatives. And generally, we have driver loaders, we have route efficiency mapping, all of that is already built in. So I'm not sure we could look at something you'd suggested, 24 hours. I'm not sure we can collect waste in the evenings or through the evenings because of the disruption and the noise that we have. However, of course, we can always be more efficient. So we would look at providing the most efficient waste service going forward. Of course, the one thing that would be remiss of me to say, if I didn't say it, is we are in an incredibly difficult MTFS position. As we know from our budget going forward. And one of the reasons why the service, we did look, I do believe, in Bridgend some time ago to put the service out to procurement was to save money. That was one of the drivers. And also to look at, there was significant levels of sickness way above what was expected previously. So what we do need to ensure is that if we make these decisions, that we do them for the right reasons, and that we do look after welfare and well-being of our staff. That is very important. Whichever route we go down, it's about providing for me as a director is providing the best public service that we can, waste service in the most efficient way possible.
Thank you. It's now 17:30, we've been an hour and a half, and I've been instructed many times that we have to take a break, unfortunately, for 10 minutes. Otherwise I get shouted at. So can we reconvene in at 22, please? Leave it. Don't log out. Just leave it on and put it back in. Put your mics off, obviously, and let's see you at 22. Thank you.